Part 1. Entering the Red Prison. Across the endless landscapes of the Soviet Union, from the frozen tundra of Siberia to the burning deserts of Central Asia, there existed a world that was not marked on any tourist map, nor mentioned in school textbooks. It was called the Gulag, the main administration of camps. Officially, it was described as a correctional system, a network of labor colonies designed to re-educate criminals and enemies of the state. But for those who entered, it was not correction. It was a sentence of suffering, sometimes worse than death itself. Imagine this. You are arrested in the middle of the night, perhaps for telling a joke about the government, or for keeping a letter from a relative abroad, or simply because someone whispered your name in the wrong ear. The knock at your door comes suddenly. The officers enter without smiles, without explanations. You are given minutes to collect a few belongings, a coat, perhaps a pair of shoes. Then you are taken. The night swallows your home. And for your family, you are gone. The journey begins in crowded prison cells, where dozens are packed into spaces meant for a handful. From there, a train. Not a passenger train, a cattle car. Wooden walls, barred slits for windows, buckets in the corner for human waste. Days turn into weeks as the train lurches deeper into the wilderness. There is little food, less water, and no comfort. The air reeks of sweat, fear, and despair. People collapse. Some die before ever reaching the camps. The guards say nothing. The wheels keep turning. At last, the doors of the train slide open. A blast of icy wind greets you. The landscape is empty, bleak, merciless. In front of you rise the barracks of the camp. Wooden huts, barbed wire, guard towers with searchlights that cut through the darkness. Behind those fences begins another world, one where time no longer belongs to you, where each day is a battle for survival, and where the only certainty is suffering. Welcome to the Red Prison. Inside, the first lesson comes quickly. You are no longer a person, you are a number. Your clothes are taken, replaced by rough uniforms. Your head may be shaved. Personal belongings vanish into the hands of guards. The paperwork, stamped and signed, reduces your identity to a file. From this moment, you are not a father, a mother, a son, or a daughter. You are a prisoner of the state. The barracks are filthy. Wooden bunks stacked in tiers, crammed so tightly that bodies press against each other at night. The air smells of damp wood, unwashed clothes, and sickness. Blankets are thin, crawling with lice. Rats scurry between the beds, feeding on scraps or on the weak who cannot fight them off. Sleep is shallow, broken by the cold or by the screams of guards in the night. And then the work. At dawn, sirens blare. Prisoners are herded out into the freezing air, lined up for roll call. Guards with rifles march them through snow or mud toward the work sites, forests to be logged, mines to be dug, canals to be carved by hand. The labor is brutal, endless, and often pointless, designed not to build, but to break. Pickaxes swing until hands bleed. Shovels bite into frozen ground until muscles fail. Those who collapse are beaten, sometimes left to die where they fall. The message is clear. Survival is earned, and weakness is punished. Food is scarce, the true currency of the camp. Thin soup, often little more than hot water with a floating shred of cabbage. A piece of bread weighed so precisely that even crumbs are counted. Hunger gnaws constantly, turning friends into rivals, neighbors into enemies. A loaf of bread can buy loyalty, betrayal, or even a life. The strong survive not only with muscle, but with cunning, knowing how to trade, how to deceive, how to stay invisible. And hovering over everything is the fear. Fear of guards, fear of informants, other prisoners who spy for an extra ration of bread. Fear of punishment, solitary confinement in freezing cells, days without food, beatings that leave scars for life. And above all, fear of disappearance. One day, a prisoner stands beside you in line. The next, they are gone. No explanation. No body. Only silence. The Gulag was not simply a prison. It was a machine, grinding down human beings until they were shadows of themselves. It was a place where survival meant surrendering parts of your soul, where kindness could cost you your life, and where cruelty was often the only protection. This is the Red Prison. This is where dreams ended, where voices were silenced, and where the snow of Siberia still hides bones that history tried to forget. Part 2. Daily life and silent terrors. When the gates of the Gulag closed behind you, there was no calendar. Days blurred into nights, weeks into months, years into eternity. Time lost all meaning. and only survival mattered. The morning began not with a sunrise, but with the sound of commands barked by guards, the crack of rifle butts against wooden doors, and the blare of whistles. Prisoners were yanked from the fragile warmth of their bunks, forced into the cold, no matter the season. Siberian winters were merciless. -40 degrees, winds that cut like knives, snow so deep it swallowed boots. Yet even in these conditions, men and women were ordered to stand in thin uniforms for roll call. To move even slightly was to risk a blow from a guard's rifle. After roll call, the workday began. Prisoners were divided into brigades, labour squads that were marched under armed watch to the work sites. Logging brigades hacked at frozen forests. Mining brigades descended into the darkness, swinging picks by lantern light in tunnels that dripped with icy water. Construction brigades carved canals, raised railroads, or built factories, often with nothing but shovels and bare hands. Work was not measured by effort, but by quotas. If the brigade failed to meet its assigned quota, punishments followed. Rations were cut, sleep was reduced, or solitary confinement awaited. The quotas were designed to be impossible, ensuring that hunger and exhaustion were constant companions. The system was not made to rehabilitate, it was made to break. Food was the thin line between life and death. The daily ration might include 400 grams of bread, a ladle of watery soup, and perhaps a spoonful of porridge. Bread was weighed on scales, and every crumb mattered. Those who worked harder or who cooperated with guards might receive an extra slice, the difference between living another day or collapsing in the snow. Hunger twisted the mind, turning prisoners against each other. Friendships shattered when a crust of bread could mean survival. Yet food was not the only form of currency. Cigarettes, scraps of clothing, even a nail or a piece of wire could be traded. In this hidden economy, cleverness was as valuable as strength. Some learned to steal without being caught, others learned to flatter guards, while a few became informants, betraying their fellow prisoners for favours. Trust was dangerous, because betrayal lurked in every shadow. The barracks, meant for rest, offered no relief. Wooden bunks stacked in tiers forced bodies into unnatural closeness. Lice crawled through hair and clothing. Coughs and groans filled the air as diseases spread unchecked. Tuberculosis, dysentery, and scurvy killed silently, claiming the weak one by one. Medical help was scarce. Doctors in the camp often had no medicine, only the power to declare a prisoner fit for work. Those who were not fit were often discarded like broken tools. Punishment in the gulag came in many forms. For minor disobedience, standing out of line, speaking without permission, prisoners could be beaten, denied food, or thrown into solitary cells. These cells were small, dark, and freezing. Some were built underground, where the damp air ate at the lungs. Others were unheated wooden boxes, where the prisoner froze through long Siberian nights. A few days in solitary could break even the strongest spirit. Worse still were the secret punishments. Prisoners could vanish without warning. A name was called during roll call, the person stepped out, and they never returned. Rumours spread. They had been executed, or transferred, or simply buried in the snow. Silence was the rule. To ask questions was to draw suspicion onto yourself. But perhaps the greatest terror was psychological. The gulag was not only about labour and punishment. It was about erasing identity. Prisoners were made to repeat slogans praising the state, to confess to crimes they never committed, to thank their captors for the opportunity to work. This constant pressure twisted reality, making some doubt their own memories, their own sanity. The line between truth and propaganda blurred until survival meant accepting the lie. And yet, even in this world of cruelty, fragments of humanity survived. In whispers after dark, prisoners shared poems, sang forbidden songs, or told stories of home. A piece of bread secretly slipped to a starving neighbour could mean life. A carved figure from a scrap of wood, hidden beneath a bunk, could preserve sanity. These small acts of resistance did not overthrow the system, but they defied it in ways the guards could never erase. Every day in the gulag was a gamble with death. Some gambled and lost quickly, collapsing in the snow or succumbing to disease. Others lasted years, their bodies hardened, their spirits scarred but unbroken. But all carried the same knowledge, that beyond the fences, the world moved on, while inside, time stood still. The gulag was not just a prison of the body. It was a prison of the mind. It was a place where silence screamed louder than words, where trust was poison, and where survival meant sacrificing pieces of your soul, one by one. Part 3. Collapse and shadows that remain for decades. The Gulag system stretched across the vastness of the Soviet Union like a shadow made of barbed wire. But no empire of fear lasts forever. By the middle of the 20th century, cracks began to form. After Stalin's death in 1953, whispers of change drifted through the camps. Prisoners dared to hope, but in the Gulag, hope was dangerous. Guards continued their routines, quotas were enforced, punishments carried out. For many, nothing changed, not yet. It was Nikita Khrushchev's famous secret speech in 1956 that first pulled back the curtain. Behind closed doors, he admitted what millions already knew, that under Stalin, terror had reigned, and countless innocents had been swallowed by the machine. For survivors, this was not news. It was a bitter confirmation. Yet outside the camps, the world finally began to listen. Releases began, slowly, unevenly. Some prisoners were told they could leave, but they had nowhere to return. Homes were gone, families scattered, identities erased. They stepped outside the gates as ghosts, strangers in their own homeland. Others never saw release at all. Paperwork was lost, trials were unfinished, and the Gulag's machinery ground on, even as officials claimed reforms were underway. By the 1960s and 70s, many of the worst camps were shut down, but the system did not die overnight. It evolved, shifting into new forms of punishment and control. Political prisoners, writers, thinkers, dissenters continued to vanish. They were sent to psychiatric hospitals, labor colonies, and remote prisons. The Gulag had changed its face, but the spirit of repression lingered. For those who survived, freedom brought new struggles. Imagine stepping into a world that had forgotten you. Decades had passed. Children had grown old. Friends had died. Survivors carried numbers tattooed in their memory, scars on their skin, and nightmares that woke them in the night. They tried to tell their stories, but often, no one wanted to listen. The state preferred silence. Neighbors avoided them, afraid of guilt by association. Even families struggled to believe the horrors described. To many, the Gulag was unthinkable and therefore easier to deny. But history does not disappear so easily. Survivors wrote memoirs in secret, smuggling words out like contraband. Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago shattered the silence when it was published abroad in 1973. His words exposed the machinery of terror to the world, giving voice to millions who had been silenced. The Soviet leadership called him a traitor, but the truth had already escaped. And still, the ruins remained. Across Siberia, rusting watchtowers leaned against the wind. Barracks rotted into the earth. MASS graves lay hidden beneath moss and snow, unmarked and unnamed. Local villagers sometimes stumbled upon bones when digging foundations or cutting timber. They whispered that the forests were haunted, that the cries of the dead echoed at night. For them, the Gulag was not history. It was memory raw, painful, inescapable. In the years leading to the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, the Gulag faded from official speech. The government buried files in archives, sealed documents, and redacted names. A system that had once consumed millions was reduced to silence on paper. The silence was intentional. The silence was its own form of violence. Today, the Gulag exists in fragments. Museums preserve a few sites. Historians dig through archives, piecing together the scale of suffering. Survivors, now old and frail, give testimonies to ensure their voices do not vanish. But with every passing year, more voices fade. The risk grows that the world will forget, and that forgetting will allow history to repeat itself. Because the Gulag was not only a network of camps, it was an idea that fear could control a nation, that human lives could be reduced to labor and numbers, that silence was stronger than truth. That idea is harder to kill than any barbed wire fence. Some who visit the ruins speak of strange feelings, of heaviness in the air, of whispers carried on the wind. Psychologists call it trauma imprinted on a place. Others call it haunting. Whether ghosts walk the corridors of collapsed barracks or not, one truth is certain. The memory of suffering remains carved into the landscape itself. The Gulag system may be gone, but its shadows stretch across generations. Children grew up without fathers or mothers. Entire families were erased from records. Whole villages were built and destroyed by forced labor. And millions of names are still missing, buried under snow, hidden in unmarked graves, locked inside secret files. So when we speak of the Gulag, we must not speak only of death, hunger, and punishment. We must speak of memory, of how a society can silence its past, of how ordinary people can be turned into tools of oppression, and of how fragile freedom becomes when fear takes root. In the end, the Gulag was not just a prison system. It was a mirror reflecting what happens when power is unchecked, when humanity is stripped away, when truth is silenced. The rusting fences may fall, the documents may remain locked, the survivors may fade into the silence of age, but their voices still whisper if we choose to listen. The Gulag is gone, but its shadows are not. They linger in the ruins, in the memories, and perhaps in us.